can't we do that? And ditto with gender. There's one moment in the Benjamin portion where Benjamin and it's Alula in Madeleine, right? Yeah.
Mhm.
Where they are like they finally cross, the two of them, and they're gonna do the special kind of cross where like you're conscious the whole time and then you get to go back into your body. And they do this like in the process of having sex and as part of the sex that they're having, and then they experience sex as the other's physiology. And I was like, that's interesting. That's really interesting. Who has never thought like what would this be like with a different anatomy? And like that was it in terms of the discussion of gender,
Mhm.
which I thought was a little bit frustrating too, because there's so much to be said there. So yeah, so those were some of the places where I felt like I wished that the decisions about who to cross into, or I wish that more had been done with those characters now that she's in them.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. Yeah, I mean, for me, one of my favorites was Edmond de Bressy, who's a very wealthy woman who has been horrifically burned. And so her face and chest are just completely disfigured. And so she wears a veil almost constantly. And but she comes with the comfort and the safety that wealth and the autonomy that wealth provides. And so I thought that going to this question of like power dynamics and who you want to be, and there's a little bit of who's available when you need a body to jump into as well. I mean, Alula doesn't have absolute power to pick her person, just because of the circumstances of the world. But that question
Yeah,
of, oh, go ahead.
I was just saying in the funny way that at one point she's like, that's just kind of hard to get people to stare at you in the eyes.
Yeah, yeah,
That was
yeah.
funny.
To make the crossing happen is actually kind of hard to
Stare at me.
get a
keep
stranger
going,
to
keep
agree
going.
to. Yeah, and so I guess similarly, those questions of disfigurement versus wealth, bodily beauty versus other kinds of trades, and I agree with you. I don't think those things, they're gestured to, but they aren't unpacked in an interesting way, which kind of brings me to I'm not a huge Baudelaire or Benjamin scholar by any stretch, and yet I don't feel like what they're doing in this book is this book is building on their work or is somehow talking
Yes.
about what what Benjamin's philosophy was, what Baudelaire's poetry was. Like I don't quite
Yeah.
know why these two were picked.
Absolutely, absolutely. And in some ways, I felt like maybe the reason that maybe the reason that Baudelaire was picked is because of the Baudelaire Society thing. And somehow he wanted to pull in Coco Chanel, who is like another famous figure who's like exists in the universe of the novel as Coco Chanel, but also they like never do it. Like she never shows up really in any meaningful way except for like one scene, right? Um, and
She's a weird villain in the background though, like they just keep talking about
right?
her.
Which is kind of great. Like I was definitely like, okay, Coco Chanel, like actually kind of a cool person historically. I mean, like I'm not necessarily cool in terms of like I love her politics, but cool as in like she had a really interesting life.
Mm-hmm.
And I was kind of imagining her as like Glenn Close as Cruella de Vil,
Mm-hmm.
which worked for me. Like that works for me. Like that, like I want that costuming, I want that attitude, I want that whole thing. Like that I was like, okay, bring her on. And then she doesn't really show up either. Um, there's so many points like that where I was like, but why Chanel? But why Baudelaire? But like why Benjamin? I don't know Baudelaire at all. I know Benjamin a tiny bit. Um, and I definitely felt like, oh, should I? Like if I knew them better, would this be adding to the story?
I don't think so.
Yeah, which just then feels like, so why them?
Unless you think this book has an aura, which I don't think that's how Benjamin would think of it.
And I mean, maybe part of it is to make the sort of frame narrative of it work because like, we get at the beginning, I didn't write this book, I stole it. Here's how I got these three manuscripts that I bound together, and I am a rare book binder, blah blah blah. And like maybe if they weren't famous, like if it wasn't Baudelaire and Benjamin or some other two like authors that people actually want to collect, like it wouldn't matter. So like maybe it's just like I had to pick two authors who people collect their works. Do people collect other Benjamin's? Is he that? I don't know.
I mean, people collect everything, but
True. Very true.
but
Uh,
so Well, no, so
Look at my weird collections.
I think this is leading to kind of like a couple things that don't break the book exactly, but are kind of big question marks in the, circa 2020, no less. So the first one is the depiction of gender in this book, I think is got some issues.
Well, I mean, from the very start, like at no point do we get any indication of why this character loves Kawahu so much that she is willing to not just like leave her entire life, her entire body, etc., but also break the fundamental law, like spiritual, religious, um, governing law of her people, like metaphysical law. Like it is capital L in the book law, right?
Right.
The
And
law, the
she's
most
essentially
capital.
like a priestess leader in training.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And she's going to abandon all of that and break the central taboo to run after this guy who we never then get any sense of why he might be so impressive.
And I do have to say, this is this intro. I loved you the way the seashell loves the sea. When people put their ears to my mouth, it was your song they heard. I love you the way the sand loves the water, always receiving you with hushed pleasure. I loved you the way the thunder rolls through the night, the way butterflies attend to the flower, the way the moon follows the sun. That was my starting point after the preface, and I was definitely thinking, well,
Yeah, yeah.
nobody
The
talks this
only
way.
thing, the only thing I thought with that was like, okay, so she likes to fuck him,
Which is fine when you're 18 or
which
whatever.
is great. Like, go forth, have fun. At 18, I might have thrown away a lot of dumb things in my life to like chase after some boy, but I'm pretty sure that by like 22, I was like, oh yeah, I would like to go back home or whatever. Like, I, I don't love that depiction. And then the fact that she continues to chase after him, not just like I want to right the wrong, but like still loving him. Like, really? You still love him? That's the thing you care about? You've been 5 other lives. It's been 200 years and still the flame burns. Like, maybe I don't believe in that kind of love or don't think that it would matter at the end of the day. I don't know.
Well, and he just seemed really boring, right? He just didn't seem that interesting. And
Right.
so there's that level of, so a highly competent woman gives up her whole life and her whole career to chase a dum-dum who like
Mediocre
screwed up
guy.
his body, soul swapping, like,
Right.
of course she did. And then, for me, her in Jean, which was Baudelaire's mistress, and then her as Madeleine, who was Benjamin's girlfriend, like they're very sort of manic pixie dream girl to me.
100%.
And
But
so
like manic depressive. like
but
like
like
not the like fun kind.
Oahu gets to somehow stumble into, the poet that launched modernism and one of the great philosophers of the 20th century, and then she gets to be their girlfriends.
Of course. That's all I've ever aspired to be, as you know, is
Yes.
just some dude's lady on the side.
Okay, and
That's
so
all I
then
want.
actually I think the one that is, it's not as, it doesn't come up as much in the book, but the one that I'm really like, "Ee," is the colonialism piece.
Yeah. Oh, but wait, one more ich on gender, just
Okay.
real quick before we just like deep dive on the ich on colonialism, is part of the reason that Madeleine is chosen as the like last uh Alula body that we get is Alula, who's now in the body of this uh, early psychologist, psychoanalyst who's using the crossing as like hypnotism, blah blah blah. Um, Picks this particular body because this person, Madeleine, is like stays a little bit conscious, like enough to like know what's happening after the crossing, and it's explained that the reason that this might be so, and then the reason that she's willing to body swap with this dude and maybe die, is that she had a great love, this dude who went off to fight in World War I and died. And this love was so great that it scorched out everything about her. Like literally he goes into, or Alula goes into her brain and is like, oh, the love, it was unique. Really? Like really, again, maybe I'm like not that romantic. I love my husband very much, but like I just don't think that that's how people actually function in a world,
It's a little
you
cliche
know?
for sure. for sure.
Anyhow, keep going. Let's talk about colonialism.
I mean, I don't even think we need to belabor it. Like, you want to set up what's wrong with it?
Oh man, where do we start? So, I mean, like, the wrongest wrong is that she assumes that the reason that colonialism occurs on her island is because she broke the taboo and it's the punishment for her bad,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. And it
And never gets any deeper.
yeah, it doesn't get any deeper than that, and it no one ever debunks that. There's never like
No,
oh, like you said, talking about the Jean-Francois part that's set in the American Southeast during slave times. There's no unpacking of these other
right,
instances
right,
of slavery, of
right.
colonialism, of imperialism. The only time it comes up is when Alula and then someone else from her original community is like, why did you leave? Everything terrible happened because you left. And
Yeah, and
it's just
even
kind
in the
of left out there like
post-colonial,
that's a
yeah.
legitimate like that's a legitimate thing.
And it makes me think too that like part of what's really unsatisfying in both of those two examples and the example at the end where we have like post-colonial where she like returns to her island and it's being run by this like despot who is like a figurehead king, um, is that like in all of those places there really is like a natural way to use like the form and the function of the story and of crossing as a concept to really talk about like survivor's guilt and like dislocation and loss, um, and and the particular like dislocation and loss that comes from being a subject, um, who like has like is like forcibly pulled from their place of origin and then has to go about for the rest of their life in this like marginalized subject position, and like experiencing things as a racialized other. And of course, like Alula doesn't really all the time because she's often in white men's bodies, but she has to be aware of those things and like she still is herself. And I have to believe that as like a that like it wouldn't matter if she's in a white man's body. Like she is still a Lula, and therefore she is still this like girl. Like so, she still has that subject position, and then she still also has the subject position of being like a person of color in this like explicitly imperialist space. So like she has that inside of her, and the story never reflects on those things, on like the horror of leaving or the horror of imperialism.
Well, and also starting out as a person who wouldn't even have a concept of herself as a person of color because she only knows her society, right? And so
Exactly.
suddenly she's in a white sailor's body, white male sailor's body, and she's going to suddenly be realizing that the perception of first French people and then maybe Europeans generally on her and people like her is going to be
Right.
antithetical to how she thinks of herself. And yet, yeah, right, it's just never reflected on. She's like,
Never
cool,
does that.
sailor, I
Yeah.
give tattoos, look for Koahu.
Like, wait,
Uh,
yeah. Well, and really, I don't think there's a lot of reflection anywhere. Like, we spend so much time in her interiority, especially in the third, but we don't ever really get reflection. We do get a discussion of the bodies that she has taken over, of their emotional space. Like, Jean-Francois is really like melancholy. And
and just
again,
like
he's another, what?
he's a lazy whiner. I think that's what you
He's
mean.
a lazy asshole. Yeah. Well, and like the reason again that she's able to cross with him is that she meets him when he's like, "Oh, woe is me. I'm a sad, melancholy boy." Like he's very like Goethe, like I'm just so sad I should kill myself and it'll be romantic. And she's like, "I can help you with that. This is why I picked you." But so like we get a lot about them, which I thought was interesting. Like, oh, what an interesting concept that like you would be yourself, but then you would also have these like drives and these pulls and these emotional states that like aren't your own. Like, oh, that could be kind of interesting. Doesn't reflect on that, but also never really reflects on like her,
Right. Yeah.
which is
Yeah.
a
How